Emily. Emily has worked in digital content for more than 10 years, shifting from marketing copywriting and content strategy to UX writing and content design. She's a staff content designer working on Mozilla's Firefox browser. Her favorite parts of content design are diagramming and untangling messes, collaborative problem solving, and connecting the dots between projects and opportunities across the organization. She's also a UX mentor, so she enjoys helping content designers enter and navigate this field, which is why we thought she'd be a wonderful person to talk about creating content design portfolios, which are, you may be experiencing that if you are job hunting, the requests for portfolios. So that we're delighted to welcome Emily, and I will let her take the screen.
Thank you so much, Paula. Let me get my share going. Okay, looks like you can see my slides. As Paula said, I'm Emily Machoyak, and thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to talk about content design portfolios. And to get us started, I was wondering if I could get like a show of emojis or reactions in the chat of how many people here have a portfolio that you're happy with right now? All right, I see a thumbs up. Okay, I see a couple. That's awesome. Okay, how about the flip side? Who has a portfolio that they're not happy with? I see a sad face. Anyone in that camp? Yep, I see a grimace. Okay, in the middle, yeah, that's okay too. I'm gonna just freely admit here that I am in that latter camp of a portfolio that I am not happy with right now, but we're gonna talk about all that. So let's dive in. Just a little bit more about me. I've spent the last 15 years working in digital content, and as you heard, I transitioned from marketing to content design, and I am based in Chicago, where I live with my husband and a cat and dog, and pictured here at their most judgmental. In my free time, I like sewing, cooking, watching bad movies, and I'm not from Seattle, but quick shout out to my favorite good Seattle movie, 10 Things I Hate About You. Okay, back to business. I just hit my 3-year anniversary working on Mozilla's Firefox browser, and that's the reason why my portfolio is probably a little out of date. After a few years of hopping between tech jobs, I was really grateful to land at a place where I could settle for a little while, especially as that UX job market has hit the down part of the roller coaster. But I'm also glad because it means that I had some breathing room from that dreaded task. Because fun fact, did you know some content designers would rather create a whole presentation on portfolios than work on their own? Yes, that's me. And as I mentioned, the update portfolio is kind of languishing on my to-do list, but I have spent many hours over the past several years talking about and reviewing people's UX portfolios, both as a member of hiring panels and most often as a UX mentor on ADP list. And so week after week, I talk to mentees who are unsure about what to include in their content design portfolio that will best showcase their skills and help them stand out in a crowded applicant pool. So today I'm going to spend some time sharing the advice that I've given over the years about building UX content portfolios. As someone who broke into this field without ever having had UX in my job title previously, I know that the portfolio process can be extra challenging for folks who don't have that traditional UX experience. But the good news is that you don't need UX in your title or on your resume to create case studies that showcase your UX chops, your working style, and your overall problem-solving skills. So when building your portfolio, it helps to kind of step back and consider the 3 types of projects that you could possibly include as case studies. The first would be on the job work from a previous role or a volunteer position. The second would be work that you did in a course or a training program. And the third is speculative work. So I'm going to go through each of these project types, but I'm going to also focus on why it's important to try to lead with that on-the-job work and how you can do this even without prior UX experience. So I will also get into coursework and ways to use speculative work strategically to highlight your skills. All right, so we're going to start with on-the-job work. And by that, I mean a project where you help to solve a real problem outside of a classroom or a theoretical context. And I often hear from people who feel like their previous work experience is too messy, it's incomplete, or they feel it's not relevant enough to include. And I'd like to challenge that thinking and share some ways that you can feature real projects in your portfolio, even if you've never worked in UX. Real on-the-job work really stands out to hiring managers because it shows that you know how to collaborate with a cross-functional team, how to handle tough stakeholder conversations, how to handle problems and setbacks, how to work with technical constraints, and how to make compromises while balancing the competing needs of the business, of the users, etc. So how do you translate non-UX work into portfolio case studies? Here's where you'll want to think deeply about your work history and pinpoint areas where you've showcased any skills that are parallel to, adjacent to, or even in the same metaphorical zip code as common content design processes. So, for example, you can think about skills that hiring managers are looking for, like writing or planning content, and that could be for internal or external audiences. If you think about blog posts, email templates, newsletters, lesson plans, slide decks, you can easily think about how you structure that content and bring in those content design principles. When it comes to analyzing, auditing, or organizing multiple pieces of content, so if you have experience, going through a website to see what pages need to be refreshed, organizing articles, videos, any type of content, you can talk about how that experience is relevant in the world of content design. And also just the skill of collaborating across different teams is a pretty important one in this field, and especially if you have worked with cross-functional disciplines like marketing, visual design, legal, executives, engineers, or other technical roles, you could really spin that experience in your favor. And some additional skills you could think about if you've ever developed or shaped guidelines or review processes for any type of written content in the workplace, you can think about that from a content design point of view. Or think about times that you have participated in research, and that could include competitive comparisons, qualitative surveys, qualitative studies, or even if you get scrappy and conduct informal research based on conversations that you have with customers or your support staff, or even like volunteering to gather team insights for an internal project, shows that you have the skills to kind of collect and analyze that type of information. And if you've ever recommended a user-centered change to a product, a document, a process, anything that you're basing on research or internal data, that shows that you have those analytical skills to that you will need to succeed in a UX job. And I will admit, depending on your work history, you may need to get a little creative here and think about where your skills map to UX skills. And this exercise will be a lot easier for those with a background in a content field like marketing, copywriting. But I have talked to plenty of career switchers from education, academia, journalism, small businesses, and nonprofit backgrounds who have done a lot of these things, even if they didn't have the UX vocabulary for it at the time. So the bottom line here is you don't have to be a traditional UX work to show off your UX skills. All you have to do is be able to tell a story and tell a story in a way that parallels common UX and content design processes. So to showcase your transferable skills and, of course, any artifacts and examples that you have that bring these stories to life. Another way to lead with real world work is to draw on volunteer experience. And I know that having the time to do unpaid labor is not a luxury that everyone can afford, but if you are able, volunteer projects are great for boosting your portfolios and with work that actually makes a real world impact. So there's a lot of organizations that can help with this. I'll share links, resource sheet at the end of this, but you could partner with an organization like TechFleet, Catch a Fire, or Develop for Good. Or you could try reaching out to a local nonprofit or small business. And remember, no matter what type of volunteer work you're doing, make sure that you're saving any drafts and artifacts as you go, so that will make it easier to assemble your case study later. And something else to keep in mind is that volunteer opportunities often can't provide you a lot of support or mentoring for newbies. And many organizations will have little to no experience with design processes, let alone UX writing. So this kind of a work can come with challenges in terms of communication, expectation setting, and you'll need to kind of solve those on your own. But the good news is those challenges are similar to ones you might find in the UX field. And as you learn to navigate those, you'll be growing your skill set and demonstrating your resilience and adaptability. And a lot of us have been here with plenty of real projects, but feeling like you might not have the ideal results for that project that you'd want to put into a portfolio. So maybe the project got canceled before it launched and there's no data to measure success, or the dreaded gut punch, you get laid off mid-project. It sucks when any of these things happen, but none of that should stop you from including your work in a case study. As long as you're able to tell a compelling and coherent story about the state of the project when you entered it, your role in it, and its state when you stopped working on it, that can form the basis of a strong case study. And we know that hiring managers want to know that you know what should go into a product launch, even if maybe your partners didn't at the time. So if you don't have post-launch information available, you can try to include the following. You can say, what metrics would you have measured or monitored post-launch, and what actions would you have taken based on those? What experiments would you have run on the feature after the MVP launch, and what would you hope to learn? What would have been your fast follow design improvements? I think we all probably have a lot of those for most of the projects we work on. So don't be afraid to acknowledge curveballs or even missteps that happened during the project, and share what you learned from them, because real work doesn't happen in a straight line. So why should case studies? To me, I would think that the messiness can be a feature and not a bug, because hiring managers should be looking for candidates who can deal with mess, who can jump into projects mid-flight, quickly pivot to a new project when priorities change. That's one of the skills you'll need to have. So if there's a case study in your back pocket that you don't think is good enough, I would take another look at it. Now we're going to move on to talk about coursework. And formal training, isn't a requirement for landing a UX job usually. And but there are plenty of content design courses and boot camps that can be helpful, that can help you learn those foundational UX skills and build your design vocabulary. And some of these courses might say that you'll walk away with a portfolio piece, and that can be super appealing when you're just starting out. But there's a few things to keep in mind. And I'm not here to say that you shouldn't ever include coursework in your portfolio. I think you totally can. But I would advise that if it's at all possible, your portfolio should contain more than coursework. And here's why. UX courses and boot camps have some project pitfalls. So this can include the project follows like a really clean, linear process that is a lot simpler than a real project would ever be, with the exception of courses that include like a volunteer internship placement. Many portfolio assignments follow this process that just isn't a realistic example of what work would be. Another pitfall I've seen is that some of these projects can overemphasize surface level skills like editing a sign up flow or writing error messages. And even for entry level roles, hiring managers want to see some like deeper skills than just microcopy. Another pitfall is that these projects are usually missing context and constraints that would be present in the real world, that kind of show how to deal with just the unexpected and all those things. And worse, you might end up with a portfolio piece that's identical to the thousands of other students who have taken the same course, and that is not a great way to stand out in a competitive hiring environment. But if you do choose to include coursework in your portfolio, ideally supplementing your on-the-job work, you can take some extra steps to showcase your design and critical thinking skills and make your assignment a little bit more distinct. So you could make a list of teams and roles that you would have looped in if this had been a real project, and what questions you would have asked. Well, I'm gonna see if my dog wants to come up. while I talk. You could also detail any steps that you would have taken that your assignment may have left out, such as user research, usability testing, or experimentation, and bonus points if you can do your own usability research. You could also explain the metrics or signals that you would look for to know if your proposal was successful. And you can also make sure you're going above and beyond with the polish, the visual polish, showing off your Figma skills, just kind of like showing that you know your stuff and making you stand out from other students. And the third category I'm going to get into is spec work, which is short for speculative work. And that refers to work that's hypothetical analysis or redesign of an existing product that you complete on your own. So for example, you might take an app that you use every day, analyze a few key flows, and document or mock up improvements that would make that experience better. And the nice thing is that it doesn't cost anything but your time. Doing spec work may even potentially help you stand out when you're applying to a job, although your mileage may vary. You can see there is an article from a couple of years ago. I'll post a link to this that explains how Jason Fox has done this in the past. It can also help you showcase skills that your other case studies might be lacking. So if there's an area that you want to kind of demonstrate more skill in, you could use spec work to round that out. But I would say that spec work is prone to many of the same issues as coursework. It's theoretical, it's context-free, and it's siloed from any realistic constraints or impacts that would allow you to showcase those skills that hiring managers are looking for. So don't forget to elevate a speculative case study by following the suggestions on the previous slide for coursework. You could even do, again, your own competitive research or scrappy user research, anything that's going to make your case study more realistic. And I will say, watch how much time you're spending on this, especially, in this crowded applicant environment. It might not be worth the time gamble that it might not get you an interview, but again, it might. So just remember, make that work as realistic as possible. I think I already covered that point. But also don't approach the work with a tear down mindset. This is something that could really backfire on you. It's really easy to be dismissive of copy or designs without realizing that the team who worked on it was dealing with internal or technical constraints that led them to make those choices. So if you do this, make sure you're offering constructive criticism while acknowledging that there's information that you just can't and don't know in this scenario. So gonna wrap up, and I'm looking forward to your questions, but I'll say that portfolios may be the bane of any content designer's existence, and speaking for myself, but I hope that some of this advice has been helpful as you think through your case studies. And just kind of a few final thoughts to sum it up. For me, I like to take some comfort in the fact that there's no one right way or formula to build a portfolio, to build a case study. Is really about what I like to do actually is look at what's out there on LinkedIn, what's out there with people I admire, and kind of see if I can apply those case study formulas to my own work and just pick what works for me and leave the rest. You could also, I also want to make sure that you are telling stories about the real skills, especially when you're entering this field. Make sure that you're not just spouting buzzwords and jargon, but think about what are the core skills that hiring managers are looking for that you want to be demonstrating. So that includes making sure you show that you know how to solve problems with realistic, complicated, and messy situations. And if you kind of go into it with that mindset, you can prioritize the stories that really let your skills shine. I want to do just a quick plug. I'll be speaking at Button this year in October, so I really hope I see some of you there. I'll be talking about everyone's favorite topic, AI. So hope to see you there. And yes, I will be sharing these slides and some resource links, including some of the organizations I mentioned. And I will also share a link to my ADP list site where you could schedule a free mentoring session with me if you want to chat. And I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily. That was great. I have had a portfolio for a really long time, but I'm in the process of like redoing it, and there's a lot of great stuff that I took from that. Thanks.
You're welcome.
We do have some questions in the chat if you're open to fielding a few of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. One that you kind of got at already. The question is, so somebody who has helped develop or document content review processes in particular, but doesn't really have the metrics to demonstrate measurable improvement around those, because those can be really hard to gather. What would be maybe a good way to detail that in a portfolio? You did mention that you could say what metrics you would use, if you had your druthers, but any other ideas? I think, maybe I'm the things that kind of come to mind for me are talking about adjacent improvements maybe that you could speak to or something like that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's
Yeah,
from
and
Chrissy.
well, thank you. And the question, it was about a process improvement, or can you, sorry, repeat this, the first part of the question?
Content review processes.
Oh, content review. Yes. I think with that, you can think about how to visualize, like, what was the process before, and obviously what was it after? Did you eliminate steps? Did you make it faster? Did you cut out the middleman? Anything like that is just good to show, like, what's the thought you put into it, and especially if it involved like dealing with different stakeholder groups, as this often does. I think that could be a really compelling story. But as you said, if there are metrics like, oh darn, I really wish I could have measured like how long it took before and after, but I just didn't, but that's something I would look at in the future, that can always be a good story as well.
Awesome. Kind of related, actually. Well, not related entirely, but this is a question that I love because, we've all had these projects. The question is, what about when you aren't happy with what shipped? So, you're showing it in your portfolio, but maybe you would have done things differently. You didn't have the right stakeholders, etc.
Yeah. And I mean, this happens to be all the time. I've talked to a lot of people who are dealing with this. I think it is super common. For me, it kind of falls in that bucket of like, oh, maybe the story didn't have a super happy ending. But I think in that case, it is kind of about being diplomatic, because like we don't want to go in there and be like, well, they didn't listen to me at all and it totally sucked. We want to maybe say like, do the stakeholder feedback, this is what shipped, but these are the changes that I recommended, and if I were to do this project again, I might do X, Y, Z differently. I think that might be a way to come at that.
Nice. Yeah, there were a couple of really good follow-on comments. Talking a little bit about your fast follow, or making it just a great story to tell during interviewing about how you did handle that. Interviewers love to ask you about challenges that you've experienced, so that's a great story. And then another comment from Vinish about, really like so much of the part that potential hires are interviewing you for is about the process, right? And the journey and how you made decisions along the way. So I thought that was a good one too. Justina asked, what can you do when you don't have hard outcomes or stats? Okay, so kind of in the same vein, I never remember to capture those outcomes. I feel like you kind of answered that, when we were chatting a little bit, but just to kind of recap what I heard, some of it had to do with, looking at the metrics you would have used and giving some examples of how that could play out. And like I said, maybe adjacent wins. Will,
I agree with that.
Had a great question too. Why is the content industry seeing layoffs right now? Why is it so competitive? This is a big question right now.
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
Not an economist, but I think there's a lot of stories about capitalism and venture capital that we could tell about this contraction right now. I personally don't believe it is like an AI driven robots are taking our jobs. That might be a story some CEOs are telling, but I think it is an unfortunate like economic headwind that yeah, there's no way around it. It sucks. And I think that it has made this environment so much tougher. And something I do say to mentees who are, struggling and going through long periods of unemployment, that like it's not all you, like you could do everything right and still not get it. It is just about being persistent and keeping those connections going. And if anyone has any better advice, please share. I know it's a tough time.
That's actually a really nice, yeah, if anybody wants to kind of put in the chat if they have good advice. And meanwhile, I'm just going to address a quick question from Andrew. What is a fast follow? Just a fix?
Yeah, I guess that's what is one of those jargon terms that we use, that at least I use in my workplace sometimes, where it's usually something that the designers want that gets cut from what's originally going to ship. Like maybe, oh, we just didn't have time to put that little content blurb in there, or we didn't have time to add that extra bit of explanation to this step. So yeah, just like if you're working on a project and you notice things like that get cut, like file that away, because you want to tell that story in your case study of like, this is what I would have kept in the project because of, XY user reason. And unfortunately it was cut. And you could always say, and that's what I would do in the very next release. Because the good news is like, yeah, when you're telling your case study, you could maybe correct, you could kind of play product manager a little bit. Like I would prioritize this, I would experiment with this, because we have those insights as well.
Okay, I like it. Alexei asked about the length of portfolio and case studies. Are we looking at 30-second wraps with results? Are we looking at kind of longer documents? I've heard varying opinions on this. So I'd love to hear kind of, Emily, what your experience is.
Yeah, I think it is about, it's about your audience. And at the time, like, and unfortunately that with the job process, there is, there's the HR software that reviews it. There's the HR person who probably doesn't know anything about UX writing, then the hiring manager, and all those people are going to look for something a little bit different, right? But I think the big distinction to keep in mind is, I often tell people, like, the portfolio that you send with your application should be really scannable, digestible, not super dense. But then hopefully when you make it further along in the process, they're going to ask you to come in and present, or they're going to ask you to talk in more detail. And at that point would be appropriate for like a longer, more in-depth presentation. So just kind of like think about who your audience is and what you're trying to get out of that step that you're at in the process.
Yep. Good old information design. Saving design artifacts. What is the best way to do that? Will goes on to say, for web design, what kind of artifacts should I be saving? Or is it before and after screenshots of a page that I redesigned? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think before and afters are really great, but there's also like that messy middle. Like, did you sketch a wireframe? Did you have a workshop that you could take a screenshot of the whiteboard or the mural board or whatever you're using? Because at least in the world of UX, it really, as Ariel mentioned, it's about the process. It's not about the beginning and end, although they want to see that. So I think as you're going through a project, try to save as much as you can. I know like there's some organizations that have NDAs and more restrictions, but something I like to do is like when I do my mid-year review and end of year review, I kind of take an inventory and take some of my files, put them where they're going to be safe for next time I need my portfolio. So if you can kind of build that into your routine of just making sure you've got your stuff and doing that along the way, it becomes less of a chore at the last minute.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that one enough. I have not done as well as I could in that department, and I think it's really hurting me in some of the ways that I'm able to talk about my work. So in replacement, I've done some spec work. So no, formats for there's a couple of questions. One person is asking if Substack site is an acceptable platform. What about a slide deck versus a website? And then related question, and I definitely have thoughts on this one, whether or not to password protect.
Yeah, that's another great question. And this is where that rule of like, there's no one right way comes into play, because like personally, I have a website that I mentioned quite out of date, need to update that. But I've also recently seen a lot of really great slide decks, like portfolio slide decks. If you're doing one of a slide deck, which is again a perfectly great way to tell your story, I would just try to use like anchor links so someone can easily go from the like table of contents to the correct slide. Just again think about who's navigating and trying to make it easier for them. I've seen Notion, people you make portfolios out of Notion. So yeah, I do think like the form factor isn't as important as like how you're showing up, how you're telling the story. And I would choose something you're comfortable with, right? Because if you're like struggling, if you're not a Squarespace person and you're struggling through Squarespace, that's not going to be fun for anyone. In terms of password protecting, I could be curious, Errol, your thoughts. My thoughts are like, if your organization isn't like putting you under, if the lawyers aren't going to come after you, you probably don't need to password protect. But yeah, curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's kind of my opinion as well, from and just little bits and pieces I've been reading out there about people positing their ideas about it. Um it's the general consensus seems to be don't do it unless you absolutely have to. It's one of those things with like in user experience design, we talk about cognitive load, and it's just yet another step that you're putting somebody through to get to the meat. So that's kind of what I've seen being verbalized out there among colleagues. And I actually have a thought real quick about slide deck versus a website. I think those are both useful in different situations. A website is really great for getting prospective eyes on your work. I think it's also really handy for sending out. I use a slide deck when I'm actually in an interview. Rather than fishing through my website, a slide deck goes a lot better in terms of my narrative and things like that. I don't know if you have thoughts on that too.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, I think it goes back to like that audience factor. Like if you were to choose to put your whole portfolio in a slide deck, I would have two, right? I would have the one that's the one you send out that's like slim, easy to navigate, just the facts, and then the longer one that you would take to the interview. But yeah, again, I think a website, yeah, it can feel a little more like polished in for some folks, but yeah, I have seen plenty of people get jobs off of a slide deck portfolio, so it really can vary.
Yeah, I've seen people just put together PDF and call it good, and they've that's worked great. Oh, the most important pieces of content or maybe sections that you'd want to see included in a case study, like challenges, solutions, impact, blah blah blah.
Yeah, that's and again, I think this is one where it's like look at 5 or 10 portfolios from people you admire, see what they're doing, and you don't have to copy it. If it's keep what works for you, discard the rest. But I think what's always really important to include is the user goal and the business goal. And that's something I see some people just have problem and solution, which is like one way of looking at it. But I think in this kind of environment, people want to see you're thinking about things from the business perspective as well as the user perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Related, what would you consider the maximum number of portfolio projects if you wanted to demonstrate different types of skills? How many do you think people are willing to fish through?
Yeah, I think that's where the line kind of usually is drawn. Like, and again, putting yourself in the position of a busy hiring manager, like honestly, if they look at one or two, like they're probably going to look at one or two and make some snap judgments. Maybe 3. That's not to say you should have only 3 in your portfolio, but I think whatever is the top 1, 2, 3, make sure you're leading with like your most complete, you're putting your best foot forward. But yeah, I think if you have like 10, it's just not realistic that someone's going to look at that many. So I would really put your energy into a couple that are really solid, especially when you're asked to present. I've never heard of someone being asked to present more than 2 case studies in a job interview. So it's always good to have like your 2 stars.
That's kind of it specifically around portfolio questions. There's one last question about kind of folks who are looking for jobs. Alexi asks, is it the best strategy to focus on one specific field and tailor your portfolio to that, or to try to make it broad and apply for all you see. Focus or numbers game.
Yeah. And as someone who, knock on wood, has not yet been set loose of this environment to fight for jobs in the last couple of years, I will acknowledge that there's probably things going on right now that, different strategies that could be valid. But especially for people who are breaking in or trying to break into a UX field, I would go more broad with your job search. Like Scott Kuby has a lot of really great articles and thoughts about looking for jobs where you can be working with digital content that might not have UX in the title. And that's where you get those case studies that you kind of map your UX process to, that you can use down the line. But yeah, acknowledging that, like, if you're applying for a copywriter job, you're going to need a different resume, probably a different portfolio than if you're applying for a UX writing job. That's something to consider. But I would say, like, yeah, earlier career folks might have a better time casting a wider net.
Okay. Amazing. Yes. I love it. Oh, Andrew also just added a question. If you have a website, is it important to have your own custom URL, perhaps with your name? I'm having the hardest time getting my DNS mapping correct.
I would say it's not the most important by any means. I see plenty of, like, people who've got the free, Weebly or whatever in the domain. I don't think, I think spending money on a domain when you don't have to is, like, not by no means a requirement. So if that's something that's causing you trouble, I would say you could find a different route. That would
Yeah, I would
good.
definitely agree. When I've been in hiring situations, I've never balked at a generic. I just care if I can see it. So that's great. Let me just check and see if anybody else had any questions. No, that looks like it for questions. Anybody else want to pipe up with anything in the chat? Otherwise, we can kind of do our little wrap up.
I think there actually was another one, and maybe you answered this and I missed it, but it was about, and it's on this topic of kind of where to share things.
Yeah.
Someone asked about Substack sites and if that's an acceptable place to store a portfolio.
I haven't seen, in the UX field, I haven't seen a portfolio that's been on Substack yet. So that's not to say that you can't. I would just, in my experience, Substack is mainly similar to, like, blogs where it's long form. So with case studies, typically, they're more like scannable and, like, chunked out with lots of visuals. So if that is something you can do on Substack, I would say why not. But if you're more in, like, the realm of showing off your long form writing, I would say that's not, probably wouldn't be useful in a UX portfolio.
Nice.
Well, now we've gotten a couple of other comments and questions.
I see that. Yeah. We have Alexei appreciating Firefox, love the side tab manager, and glad the feature of tab groups was finally added. So yay.
Awesome.
And then Will is asking Emily and also anybody else here on the Zoom if you want to share some examples of portfolios that you think are really strong.
Yeah, I spend more time on LinkedIn than I should. And I'm always looking when people are sharing their portfolios and seeing, like, is that one I like? And I'll sometimes bookmark. There was someone who shared it the other day. I didn't know who they were at all, but I'm like, I love this. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have it on hand with me, but I think that's, like, your best bet is find the people, you start with people like you admire on LinkedIn, and then just, the algorithm is going to be feeding you hopefully a lot of content design things, and hopefully looking for examples that resonate with you.
Yeah, and Will, just to follow up on that, there are tons of articles out there that are like top 10 content design portfolios, and I have to say that, look at them with a critical eye. Sometimes people are just throwing out listicles because they're creating content and trying to get clicks, but some of them actually really have some great portfolios in them. So check that out too. Awesome.
All right.
I think that's it for questions.
Someone shared one on GitHub, so wanted to check out.
Oh, perfect. Yep. We have some folks sharing links to their portfolios, which is great.
Love that.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for the great questions, and thanks Emily for this presentation. Obviously, hitting a need for a lot of our community. Sure. Hope that we wish everyone the best in improving or creating your portfolios. Hope that you found the information tonight helpful. I just wanted to mention, I kind of skipped over in my upfront intro. I did mention in the chat, we do these events every month. So again, keep an eye on all of our channels to see what's coming up next. For local folks, we're actually going to we're looking at putting together something in person in July. So no details on that yet, but we'll publicize that as soon as we have information. And then another kind of sort of related topic, in August, we have Jen Dionisio, who is the director of coaching programs at an organization called Active Voice, you may have heard of. And she's going to be talking, the title of her talk is You're Not the Same, and That's Okay, Navigating Life Transitions at Work. So she's going to be talking about how you can manage, things that are happening to you in real life when you are still needing to show up and do work. And we'll be putting out some more the meetup information about that, the event information closer to the date, but that's one that might be of interest to some of the folks in this group as well. And if there aren't any other questions or anything, again, thanks everyone for being here, and we hope to see you at another event.
Thanks. Yeah,
All right.
Jen's going to be great next month. And Emily, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.